If you have voting tickets that you've taken and you'd like to ask a question, you can put your voting tickets in the box now. And if you're still thinking about it, there'll be one more call for voting tickets. And we'll explain all that to you. So we've got 5 minutes until we're going to get started. If you would find yourself a seat, grab a snack. And if the candidates wanted to join us at the front, that would be lovely.
Check, check. Oh, no, this one's fine. Yeah, we're good.
Hello, everybody. We're now going to get started because it's 6 o'clock. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to.
I will pay very close attention.
How are you? It's really high tech.
Who's the organizer? Who's? Hi. Hi, how are you? Okay. Do you want me to tell?
Welcome to 40 Oak Street. Welcome to. Oh, we're just sound stuff. Welcome to 40 Oak Street, CRC. Welcome to our federal candidates question evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely to have you here. My name is Denise, and I work with the Center for Social Innovation here in Regent Park, and I also work as part of the Community Civic Engagement Collaborative, which is a group of individuals and people who work for different agencies here in the community, and we try to inspire civic engagement in Toronto Centre. So that's across Regent Park and Moss Park and Cabbagetown and all of the surrounding areas here in this riding. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is the third time that I've been part of one of these candidates evenings, and it's so wonderful to have you all here and to have our candidates here. And I first want to make mention of the land that we're on. There's probably lots of questions around why land acknowledgements get done, and I don't do a traditional sort of read from the paper land acknowledgement, but I wanted to share a little bit about why we do land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements are a traditional practice of Indigenous people here on Turtle Island, and when they gathered together, Indigenous groups would welcome the people that had gathered in this way, that they would give thanks to the land, they would give thanks to their partners who joined them, and then they would set some of the rules of engagement for how they would share the land and use the land together as a group. And so that tradition has been carried forward as a way to honor the way that other people had honored the land and taken care of the land. This land has belonged to many people over the last thousands of years, including the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit, and they have been the stewards and the caretakers of this land along with many other people. And this land is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and that tells us how we use the land. And how we use the land is that there's one land that we all share from, and there's one spoon that we use. So we all are shared, and it's not a fork, and it's not a knife. It is a very passive, a very friendly utensil that we use to take from the land and share with each other. And tonight we're going to share with each other how we continue to use this land on a political level, and that's why we're all gathered here today. So thank you to the people who have come before us, who have stewarded this land and taken care of this land, and thank you to all of you for gathering with us tonight as we have conversations about how we continue to take care of the people and the land that we're on. a couple of things. Tonight, like I said, was organized by the Community Civic Engagement Collaborative, and it was graciously supported by both the Canada Muslim Vote and also by the Eat, Think, Vote campaign, and has also been supported by our partners Food Secure Canada and the Community Food Centres of Canada. So we can give a round of applause for them to their generous support. And their support has made things like our snacks possible. It has also made possible the opportunity for translation. So if you need translation tonight, there are a number of translators. There is a Tamil translator, there is a Somali translator, there is a Bengali translator, and a Vietnamese translator. If you're a translator, can you please stand up? Okay, if you need translation, you can find one of the translators in the room. Sorry? Oh, and Bill Morneau will do French for you while he engages in the debate. It's going to be a really fun time to watch that happen. Oh, and a Spanish interpreter as well in the back. Amazing, amazing. So if you need translation, you can find somebody who can direct you to that. If you would like to not have your face on camera, this section in the back is where you need to sit. So if you would like to not be on camera at all, this section in the back is where you need to sit. Now a little bit of a note about how to ask questions, and then I'm almost done and I'm going to hand you over to the people who are going to take you through the evening. At the door, you've got a ticket with a number on it. If you would like to ask a question, it's going to be by lottery tonight. And we made the decision so that people aren't putting up their hands and we have to see who's in the crowd and one person gets it over somebody else. We're not going to do that because we want to make sure that it's as fair as possible and that everybody has equal opportunity to ask a question. I'm going to let one of our moderators go over the rules, but please have your question ready. So if you're submitting a question number into the box, please know the question you're going to ask because you won't have very much time to ask your question. It'll be a short amount of time and the moderators will tell you those rules. Everybody good? Great. I'm going to introduce to you our moderators, and we are super lucky to have them this evening. We have Megan Wilson here this evening, and she is... the last time that we did a meeting like this together, she was actually one of the candidates. She was at the other side of the table. Megan is your outgoing RPNA co-chair, so she has done some fabulous work with the Regent Park Neighborhood Association, and she has agreed to be with us tonight to help us run this event. And on this side, Mr. Selwyn Peters, who is a resident of Regent Park, a very proud resident of Regent Park, and also a great community advocate for your community. So if you would welcome Selwyn as well. They're going to go over both the rules for you as audience members and also for you as participants. And then we'll say thank you at the end. So enjoy. Like I said, if you have questions after the candidates do their introductions, we'll do one more round of an ask for questions. So if you're still on the fence, you have about 15 or 20 minutes to think about what your question might be. Thank you and enjoy.
Good evening. Can I ask the people at the back to come forward and fill the chairs up so that the persons who are coming in late can have seats at the back? And secondly, so that the candidates can focus on the debate, can you put your phones on mute? You're allowed to text and use hashtags, but just don't have it ringing loudly so that the candidates are distracted by your phones ringing. Thank you. Now, I will be addressing the candidates in respect to the rules that will govern their conduct. And I'm sort of acting as an adjudicator for the candidates, so I don't have a gavel here, but I will enforce the rules very strictly. Responses from the candidates will be 1.15 minutes long, so 1 minute, 15 minutes. All candidates have a 3-minute period to make your statements.
1 minute, 15 seconds.
Sorry, what did I say?
1 minute, 15 minutes.
My goodness.
Bingo.
Long week. It was a long week already. So thank you very much, Minister Morneau. 1 minute and 15 seconds. 15 seconds, yes. Sorry, 1.15 is what?
75 seconds. That's right. That's right.
Oh, is it? Ooh, all right. Well, that's what I thought it was. You will get a 30-second warning when the green light comes on. You will have a yellow warning that tells you there's 15 seconds. And when you receive the stop sign, you must finish your statements. Or you shall finish your statements.
It would be nice if you would.
Timely answers leaves us more room for closing statements. Apparently, you get to make a closing statement as well. And we know that all of you at the table are professionals, so that you will be respectful to each other. We know that, so I don't think I need to tell you about oppressive language and abusive language. I'm confident that all of you will be respectful towards each other. You can tell us about you and let others speak for themselves. Please speak only when it's your turn and allow each individual time to share their thoughts. And that's over to my co-panelists or my co-moderator who will speak to the audience.
So again, I'll echo what Selwyn said. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it, getting involved with the neighborhood, being engaged with what's going on here in Regent Park and throughout our entire riding. So we have some rules for the audience as well, because we're not just going to make the candidates abide by those. Again, when you have your number comes up and you get the lottery to ask your question, you'll have 30 seconds to ask your question. So at 30 seconds, you will get a warning, a green card, a 15-second warning, the yellow card, and at stop, the red card, you must finish. So again, please be respectful to one another and to the candidates and to all of our guests here tonight. Feel free to express yourself, but do so diplomatically, and don't have a lot of preamble. Ask your question, because your questions are important. That's how the candidates get to respond. That's how we as a community all find out what they have to say for us. Ask questions that are about federal issues, and please try to ask about a variety of issues. So without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to the candidates who will now make their 3-minute statements. Denise, do we have an order? This way? So, Brian, if you'd kick it off, please.
For sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I apologize for the people on this side of to my left that I can't quite see properly. I'm really happy to be here. I come from the community. I live at Yonge and College, and I think the Toronto Centre is a community worth fighting for. And it's worth fighting for because it is becoming unaffordable to stay in this community. It is becoming unaffordable to live here. It's becoming unaffordable, really, for so many of us to make this the dynamic place that it currently is. And I'm worried that if we don't start to take action on this, we're gonna end up with a Toronto Centre that is just for the ultra-rich in 10 years. It's gonna be just for the ultra-rich and the ultra-wealthy. We have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of everybody in our community, and that means showing up. It means meeting with residents. It means knowing what's going on in our communities. It means coming from our communities, and that's really important. I'm a labor organizer that works with the Public Service Alliance of Canada. I fight for everyday workers to fight for the best working conditions they can possibly have. I work in our community to make sure that people are empowered and have the skills to make the change they want to see in the world. And I'm a performing artist that sings with the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir in many places around this community, including right here in Regent Park. I've been on the stages, I've sung, and created beautiful art and culture, which is so important to the vibrancy of our communities here in Toronto Centre, but especially here in Regent Park. So over the course of the next hour and a half, I will be really happy to listen to all of you, to hear questions, and to share the really different ideas that the NDP has for the Toronto Centre that can be, because let's be clear, the Toronto Centre that is right now is not meeting the needs of everyday people. So we have to make sure that we're building towards that future where everyday people are not left behind and all of us can find a way forward. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Bronwyn Cragg. I'm your Communist Party of Canada candidate. So I'm a 20-year-old student. This is my first federal election, and I'm running in this riding. Why am I running in this riding? Well, there are a number of reasons. A, I'm a humanities student. I can't afford to live in this city. I'm an LGBT person. I interact with Toronto Centre on a regular basis, and I see the struggles that Toronto Centre goes through. This is actually the riding in Canada with the 4th highest child poverty rate. It's a 40% child poverty rate. You know, Toronto Centre should be the riding that, we have Church and Wellesley, we have the hub of Toronto, Yonge and Dundas Square, we have all sorts of Indigenous community centres, we have students, we have all sorts of ethnicities, religions, languages, backgrounds, but ultimately, you know, half of a century of neglect has left Toronto Centre completely barren. Now, the Communist Party is a party that I truly believe in, and that's why I'm running for them. We are facing a global recession. We are facing the rise of the ultra-right and ultra-nationalism. We are facing poverty, food insecurity, and especially climate change. And these are all issues that the Communist Party of Canada wants to address, both nationally and globally. How do we address that? It's pretty, straightforward. It's by redistributing the funds that go to things like NATO, things like bombing other countries, and the funds that go to keeping corporations and rich people afloat, taking these funds and putting them back in the hands of the working class. People like you and me, people who, like me, are working 3 jobs, balancing that with school and this candidacy, people who just can't afford to live in Toronto Centre and in Canada proper. Now, this seems, like quite a lofty idea, but ultimately we can fund a $20 livable minimum wage. We can fund free public transit. We can fund free tuition. We can fund things like social services, expanded universal pharmacare, mental health care, elderly care, disability care. All of these things can be funded by the absolutely obscene amount that we spend on pardoning corporations who don't pay taxes, on things like bombing other countries and staging coups in other countries. This is possible. This is completely possible, and that's why I'm running not only in Toronto Centre, but in this federal election, because I want a Canada that can change for the people. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Lester. First, I want to thank Denise, Megan, and Selwyn, and all of you for coming out here tonight. This is an important part of the democratic process, and it's really heartening to see larger and larger crowds as these events take place. I've lived in Toronto Centre for more than a decade. It's been my home where I've worked in organizations involved in social purpose, trying to make people's lives better here in Toronto Centre. Organizations like the AIDS Committee of Toronto, Egal Canada Human Rights Trust, which is Canada's LGBTQ2 advocacy organization, the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and Pride Toronto. I was your candidate in this riding, along with Megan, last year at this time, for the same boundary that represents Toronto Centre. And that election was a tough one, I'm sure you all remember. Boundaries were changed multiple times. Incumbents ran in merged boundaries and merged wards, and people were confused. But through it all, I stayed true to the reason that I got involved in the first place. I wanted to see community safety improved. I wanted to see life become more affordable for people. And I wanted to see communities in general that we all love to live in. That is really why I've decided to get involved in this election as well. Safety remains a top priority, I think, for everyone in this room and at this table in front of you. I think making life more affordable is a very important issue. I think you'll hear a lot of common themes tonight from each of us across the table in front. But what you'll hear are going to be different ideas and different approaches on how to solve those problems. I believe that you deserve a federal government that is responsible with your money, that protects our environment, and that improves community safety. I think that you deserve a federal government that works to reduce barriers so that everyone in our community, regardless of where you come from or which neighborhood you live in, has the same opportunity as everybody else and is given the same chance to succeed. I'm encouraged by the fact that every day someone comes up to me and says that they'll be voting for the Conservative Party of Canada for the very first time in this election. They've supported other parties in the past, but they just don't like what they've seen. I invite you to join me and those people as we build a safer and more prosperous Toronto Centre and Canada. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Morneau. I've been your Member of Parliament for the last 4 years in a Liberal government, and I've been your Minister of Finance. It's an honor for me to be here tonight. It's certainly been an honor to represent all of you over the course of the last 4 years. As others, I'd like to thank you for being here tonight. This is an important opportunity for us to have a discussion about what we see as important for this community and for our country going forward. Some of you will know that I've been involved in this area, in Toronto Centre, for the last 25 years, trying to make a difference. I was chairman at Covenant House, where we worked to try and make sure that kids who were on the street had the opportunity to find refuge. Subsequent to that, I was involved for many years and then chairman at St. Michael's Hospital, where I'm sure many people in this room get access to health care, a place where those people that are living in Toronto Centre and some of the people that are most challenged in our community have the opportunity to find health care. But I'll tell you that I've been most proud of the work I've been able to do over the last 4 years in making a difference for the people in Toronto Centre and also making a difference for the people in Canada. We've done a number of things over the last 4 years that have made a big impact. First, and maybe most importantly, we've made an enormous difference in terms of poverty across our country. Over the last 4 years, we've reduced the number of people in our country living in poverty by about 20%. That's unprecedented in a developed country. It's about 825,000 people, including about 300,000 children that have been lifted out of poverty in 4 years. We've made, well, no, it's actually true, sir. We've made significant investments in our economy, investments in people, that have gotten us to a stage now where we have the lowest level of unemployment we've had in this country in my lifetime. We have the highest level of people working that we've had since we've been collecting statistics. And of course, we've put a price on pollution across our country. Of course, we're battling 5 provinces that aren't in agreement with that approach, but we think it's imperative that we deal with the climate challenge that we're facing here in Canada and across the world. So I will tell you that as much as I'm proud of what we've done over the last 4 years, we have more work to be done. As much as we've taken 20% of Canadians in poverty out of poverty, that means there's many more people we need to deal with. We have some policies that we know can make a continuing difference, and we're going to continue to focus on how we can do that, how we can ensure that we address our climate emergency, and how we can ensure that people in this community and across the country are safe. We know that one of the challenges here is that we need to have the ability to ensure people feel safe in the streets, and among our policies, we'll be encouraging us to feel more safe through gun safety that we know is critical. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Annemie Paul, and I'm the candidate for the Green Party in Toronto Centre. I'm so pleased to be here and to see some familiar faces from my time out in the community. And I'm also really pleased to be here because I feel that very much that the story of many of the people in this community, whether we're talking about Regent Park, Moss Park, St. Jamestown, that your story is my story. I spent most of my childhood in a one-bedroom apartment with 6 people, and so I understand what it's like to live in uncomfortable and overcrowded housing, which is the situation for many people in those communities, in our riding. My mother and my grandmother both came here as immigrants, highly skilled, qualified immigrants with many years of work experience, but when they arrived here, they were told that their skills were no good, and they both had to return back to school, back to university, and start from scratch in order to try to build a life for themselves and their family in Canada. And so my story is your story. That's how I feel, and I'm really excited about the chance to share more about the green vision for this community, my vision personally as hopefully your representative in the next parliament, and to hear your ideas as well for the future of your communities. So there's a lot at stake in this election, and this is an election unlike others. We have some fundamental issues that we need to face as a community and as a country that if we don't get them right this time around, we may not have the chance the next election. One of the basic things that we need to get right, and that is unfinished business, is to create a compassionate social safety net for all Canadians. What this means is that we need to make sure that wherever you live in this country and wherever you live in this riding, you are able to live a dignified life that is full of hope for you and hope for the community and hope for the people that you care about. Now, it's very important for me to distinguish between my holding Mr. Morneau and others who have held power accountable and going after them. It's not the same thing, but you will hear me ask Mr. Morneau this evening, because he has been our representative, how all of the things that he has talked about have made a difference in this community. Because the truth is that life is harder now in Toronto Centre than it was 4 years ago. And at the end of the day, your representative is supposed to be here for you first. That's what you deserve, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about it.
All of you were given cards when you came in this evening, and there's a lottery draw for those who will be asking questions. There are 2 persons, one on your left-hand side, one on this side of the room, and one on the other side, who will be collecting those cards. If you have your card on you, please hand it over to the person who is collecting them so that you can ask your questions of the candidates. Thank you. So Greg is on the right-hand side, and Denise is on the left-hand side for those who have cards to hand them.
Okay, thank you.
So we have some prepared questions, a couple of prepared questions for this evening for the candidates. And what we'll do is we'll go in reverse order this time. So we went from me to my left. We'll go from Selwyn's to his right this time. Hunger in our northern communities is among the highest level in any Indigenous population in the Western world. How would your party address this issue while supporting Indigenous food sovereignty?
I guess it's me, yes. Thank you very much for that question, and it's a great opportunity to talk about, and sorry, how much time did we have? 75 seconds. It's a great opportunity just to talk very quickly about the fact that, and it's always hard to say this without making it sound like a platitude, but there is no question that our treatment of First Nations in this country is one of our greatest shames, is one of our continuing greatest shames. And we say the same thing all the time. All I can tell you is that in terms of the Green Party, we have made our approach to the treatment of First Nations and Indigenous peoples an issue that is integrated into every single one of our policies. It is standalone, but it is integrated into all of them. And the approach is that they should always be at the table when an issue is being discussed that relates to their communities. We want to form a Council of Canadian Governments that includes representatives, and they should always have the first and final say in determining how their lives can be lived in their communities with the support and the resources that they deserve from the federal government to do so.
Over to me. Well, thank you. The issue around being able to have the food security in the North is an important and challenging issue. When we came into office in 2015, the annual funding for the program called Nutrition North Canada was $68 million. What we've done since then, because we found that that was both inadequate based on a report in 2014 and based on the lived experience of people in the North, is significantly increased that funding. I increased it in the budget 2016 by $68 million over 5 years. We increased it again in our fall economic statement in 2018 by another $68 million over 5 years. So from where the Conservatives were at, we've now got ourselves in a situation where it's about $100 million over the next 5 years each year. We've made an important inroads into a very challenging issue, but we know that we're going to have to continue to think about how we make a difference. We've increased funding significantly for other areas of support for Indigenous Canadians and others in the North, and we will continue to do so, knowing that this is a critically important issue in places where it's increasingly challenging to get to because of climate change.
Ryan.
Thank you. It is an excellent question, and it makes me think back to the start of our evening when we did a land acknowledgement here. And those are not just about honoring treaties that go back thousands of years in our country. It's about acknowledging mistakes that were made and moving forward together so that we don't repeat them. And when it comes to the treatment of Indigenous peoples in our North, and right here in our own communities, especially in Toronto Centre or near Sarnia, where I grew up. When it comes to their food security, when it comes to their clean drinking water, there is a lot to learn from and a lot of mistakes to acknowledge and move forward from. It's clear that the current approach isn't working. I'll acknowledge that there have been a number of mistakes made by many governments over the past years. And the time has come to put those mistakes behind us and learn from them. It's time for a federal government that prioritizes Indigenous peoples and takes action with the required amount of financial investment to get it right. We've been trying for a long time, and the time is now. Thank you.
Bronwyn.
Right. Food security in the North is ultimately a very multifaceted issue, but I think we need to acknowledge that this is an issue of white supremacy. This is an issue of a lack of social programs. This is an issue of things like federal subsidies that don't actually address the real problem. This is an issue of corporate domination, and this will soon be an irreversible issue of climate change. Now, what I propose to do and what my party proposes to do is to implement social programs. So that means things like healthcare, upping the minimum wage, things like this, into Indigenous communities in the North. No matter how urban or rural these are, this needs to be an equal playing field for all people so that they can have access to food. Also, we need to draft a new voluntary partnership between people that aren't just white Anglo-Canadians, but Indigenous people, Acadians, Quebecois, etc., that values these people and not just Anglo-Canadians in places like Ontario. So by implementing these social services and drafting this new partnership that really values other people, we can overcome food insecurity and other issues in Indigenous communities in the North.
Thank you. Brian.
Right off the bat, we need to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We had 4 years to do it under the Liberals, and they did not do it. It is primarily an issue of systemic racism and institutional racism that these communities in the North continue to not have access to good housing, good healthcare, good education. So food is just one of these many issues, and we're never going to be able to solve this until we can implement the proper protocols and the proper process in place that respects Indigenous nations as the nations that they are, and that we consult them and we work with them and we listen to what they have to say. And if we listen to the candidates right across the country, the Indigenous candidates that are running for the NDP, I will stand alongside them. I will not tell them what they need to do, and I will not tell them what they need to do with their lands. I will listen to them, and I will make sure that their voices are heard in Ottawa as your representative for Toronto Centre.
I will ask the second round of questions for the candidates. Given the link between poverty and food insecurity, what is your party's perspective and approach to poverty reduction? I will start from the far right, my far right.
I'm not okay with that. So, not from the far right, but from right here in Regent Park, I think it's important that we're working with our community stakeholders and recognizing that that there is a poverty issue in Toronto Centre. That right now we have some wealthy communities that are 5 minutes away from some of the poorest communities in the entire country. And we have to make sure that we're recognizing that issues of food security and what they look like on the ground. And for many people, that's actually the price of a McDouble at McDonald's, because it is the cheapest thing that some people can afford. And I know what that's like. I know what it's like to only have $2 in your pocket, and what can you possibly afford to eat with that? And to use that $2 to buy a McDouble at McDonald's, because that is all that you can afford. That is what poverty looks like on the ground in our communities. And we have to make sure that we're implementing the policies and that we're electing the people that recognize that have that lived experience. And we'll make sure that they never turn away from the table and never turn away from our communities who are in need, direly in need.
Bronwyn.
So as I mentioned before, we have an obscene child poverty rate. We have, as we can see on the streets, overcrowded temporary housing and really not great quality social housing in this riding. So the Communist Party of Canada proposes that we have a sort of overhaul of the system. We can't really work in this, horrible capital system. What we need to do is we need to stop taxing those who make under 40K. We need to start restoring the capital tax, restoring things like a high corporate tax, which means doubling the corporate tax. We need to raise the minimum wage to an actual livable wage, which is $20 an hour. We need to make more money to fund social housing, social programs, and decent, affordable, non-precarious work in this riding. Now, by implementing the minimum wage and a livable wage, free medical care, free education, daycare, we can actually eliminate poverty. We can lift people out of poverty by giving them an equal footing and giving them equal opportunities and, creating a real, livable, decent quality life in this riding.
Poverty is a very important issue. That's why the Conservatives have proposed a universal tax cut that will benefit everyone at all tax levels. And it's why we're proposing measures to set conditions that will help small businesses be able to start, thrive, and grow. We know that more than 70% of the private labor force is driven by small business. And so if you need good, well-paying jobs, you're going to get it from a small business. And so we really want to encourage that. Mr. Morneau will tell you that the Liberal government has been responsible for lifting many people out of poverty. But I ask you here tonight, is that your experience? Have you felt that statistic? We know that half of everyone in Canada is less than $200 away from insolvency after paying their bills at the end of the month. And so I'd like Mr. Morneau to explain to everyone how here in this room his policies have helped you get ahead.
Well, let's be clear. The Conservative approach, what they're proposing to do with their tax plan is, from the standpoint of the small business, they're proposing $500 million goes to the top 1%. I worked hard in order to make sure that our system works fairly. They're trying to turn their back on that. They're also proposing to lower taxes in a way that would actually generate lower taxes for those that are the wealthiest in our society. So we just need to put facts on the table here, folks. We're not going to take that approach. We've said that we're going to lower taxes by raising the basic personal amount to $15,000, meaning no one under $15,000 pays any taxes whatsoever, because we want to make sure that those that are most challenged are getting actual real break. It'll take a significant number of people actually off the tax rolls, more than 600,000 people. It'll make a big difference. But I'll tell you that in Toronto Centre, right now, because we put in place the Canada Child Benefit, there are 8,600 families that are getting on average $9,000 for their children because of the Canada Child Benefit. We're proposing to increase that for people when they have their child in the first year. So we're going to make a big difference on poverty for families. We're going to make a big difference in poverty for seniors by increasing the old age security. And don't get fooled by Conservative lies about what they're actually going to try and achieve, because they're not on your team.
Thank you very much. I would say my response to that would be, don't be fooled by the Liberal promises either, because they haven't delivered for this community. And the facts, I'm sorry, but there was no interrupting. And again, this is just holding, my time, please keep, thank you. This is just, again, keeping your government accountable and keeping representatives accountable. The fact is that 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 families in this community lives in overcrowded housing that costs them 50% of what they earn every month. The fact is that, yes, there are children that have been lifted out of poverty, but again, the poverty line is extremely low, and so if you're just above it, I don't know how good that feels, but the fact is that even as those children, some children are being lifted out of poverty, the poverty rate for singles and for couples without children has increased by double digits in this community. So what I say is that there is unfinished business. There's unfinished business for Toronto Centre, and there's unfinished business for our country in order to create a compassionate social safety net that plugs in the holes to make sure that everyone in our community and everyone in our country can live in dignity. And this is something that unfortunately we still have not accomplished, and it's overdue.
Okay, time. So thank you very much, candidates. We appreciate that. We're going to move to the open questions now. I do want to just remind everyone, if we could please focus on our own answers and not interrupt one another's answers, that would be super helpful. I've got the first 3 numbers, and then Selwyn and I will make our way to you depending on which side of the room you're on. So the first number is number 36, if you'd like to just show us where you are. 36? All right. How about number 7? Lucky 7. Selwyn's going to bring you a microphone.
Can you tell them who else is coming up? 7 and then who else?
And then after 7 will be number 6. So.
I would like to know from Bill's boss how you spend $94 billion more on what we already owe, and you don't do anything for the military. There isn't a sentence about it. Did we forget about them? They didn't forget about us. I'd like an answer on that.
Okay, so Anime, if you could answer that
Sorry,
question.
and it's
first.
Anime, not
Anime.
anime. Yeah, thank you. Well, it was a question directed to Mr. Morneau, but I would say that, you know, the security and defense is one of the most fundamental obligations of a federal government. The Green Party has a plan that focuses on what we think should be the priorities in making sure that we are defense ready to protect ourselves against existing threats, but also the threats that we anticipate down the line, including those that are associated with our changing climate. But I won't take up more time because it seems like the question was directed to my friend on the right here. Okay.
He's the real right. Ready? Well, thank you for the question, sir. We, as you may remember, put in place a strategy around defense spending a couple of years ago. It allows for us to continue the funding of our defense forces. It allows for us to purchase the aircrafts that we require. It allows for us to replenish the ability to actually have the ships that we require to protect the North. So what you're seeing in our current platform is a continuation of that approach, which we think is appropriate. It does show an increase in our defense spending. It's not as high as in other countries. We are at a lower level, but we are gradually increasing it, not up quite to the 2% that the NATO countries are at, but to a level that we feel is appropriate based on our current fiscal and defense situation.
Imagine that, the Liberal government not spending money when it has the chance to. The question, I think, was specifically about the more than $90 billion in debt that has been accumulated this year and the ongoing spending, as we saw released this week, with no plan whatsoever to bring it back into balance and start to pay down the debt. 4 years ago, you heard Mr. Morneau deliver a budget on a recently elected government after they had promised to balance the budget this year, in fact, this very year. And the reason that they said they were going to go into such wild debt after promising themselves in their own campaign that they would balance the budget this year, the reason that they were going to do that was for infrastructure spending. And yet we've seen that commitment fall short as well. When it comes to Canada's military, however, you heard the Prime Minister say they're asking for more than we can give. Well, it seems that everyone but the military is asking and they're getting. So the question is a good one. I don't think that the Minister of Finance provided you an appropriate answer tonight. So hopefully on the next round, he'll get around to giving you some real answers on this one.
Bronwyn.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to give you an answer that you may not like. And it's that we actually, the Liberal government proposed a 73% increase in military spending over the next few years, which ups it to $32 billion. Now the military, the Canadian military, is our biggest polluter in Canada. We're bombing countries. We're in Ukraine training neo-Nazis under our current foreign minister, who she's great friends with these people. And I just have to say that we need to, retake this funding, this 73% increase in funding, the $32 billion, and actually fund things like the things that you think that actually need funding. So things like social housing, education, infrastructure, roads, housing, things like that. Ultimately, the Canadian military is not a good guy. It's not a peacekeeping military. We need to stop pretending that it is. We're bombing other countries. We're training horrible fascists in other countries, and we need to admit this.
Right.
Thank you for the question. One of my ex-boyfriends used to work for the military, and I used to be terrified for him because he actually used to work on the Sea King. He was an Air Force tech that worked for the Sea King helicopters, and he was working on things that had passed their life expectancy many, many years ago. And I was really happy when he finally moved off of that onto other work within the Air Force. What it means is we need to make sure that our military do have what they need in order to be successful. But let's be clear about what New Democrats stand for. Nuclear disarmament. Making sure that no Canadian military and no Canadian-made military goods are used in human rights abuses in places like Saudi Arabia, and that we make sure that we're moving towards world peace and living up to our international commitments alongside that. So thank you for the question.
So just a reminder, if you could please be sure that your phones are turned off or on mute so that we can't hear them, that would be really helpful. The next person we're looking for is number 6, if you can show us where you are. Okay, great. After number 6, we'll be looking for number 15.
Thanks. I think for me, and I think for many people, a very important issue is having a more representative parliament. And I would like to ask, please, each of the candidates if they could state their position on proportional representation, please.
So if we could start with Brian, please.
Sure, absolutely. I, like many of you, are very disappointed that the last government promised us this so many times, and they did not make electoral reform happen. And what it means is so many of us feel cynicism towards the current government. So many of us feel cynicism towards our elected representatives because there is a huge democratic deficit between the way we vote and who we actually send to office. What a new Democratic government will do, and I will fight for electoral reform every step of the way, will implement mixed member proportional representation in our first mandate, which means that the next election under an NDP government would be under MMP. And only then, after everybody has experienced a full election under MMP, would we then set it to a referendum for everyday people to decide if they want to keep the system or not. But I am absolutely confident that once people experience what it means when your vote counts to the person that you send to Ottawa, that they will never go back to any other system. Thank you.
This is going to be short and sweet. We absolutely support proportional representation. We think that this is an undemocratic system. We want to see more people that are actually being voted for in Parliament, and ultimately, we totally support that. So.
So the Liberals have promised electoral reform for decades, literally. It was in their election platform in 1997, and it made a resurgence again in 2004. So here we are again. Promises, promises, promises. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that a Liberal government under Justin Trudeau will make any changes at all to electoral reform. Last week, Mr. Morneau said that, yeah, okay, we put that in our platform last time, but guess what? After we were elected, we tossed it out. And the reason why is because we talked to Canadians and only 5% of them, it turns out, were in favor of electoral reform. So he wants you to believe that their shiny platform to get elected in 2015 was based on making promises to 5% of the population. I know you're smarter than that. I know you don't buy it, and I know you won't buy it again this time.
The gentleman asked, I think, among other questions, what do we personally believe with respect to proportional representation? I'll tell you my personal belief is that proportional representation doesn't allow our democracy to work in a way that we have direct representatives, because it would allow for people who are not directly presenting themselves to the population to be in Parliament. So I always personally preferred the preferential ballot approach. As Ryan accurately said, we did, after the last election, go out and talk to Canadians and did find a very, very low level of support for any sort of electoral change and no consensus on the type of electoral change. So that was how we got to the conclusion that we would stick with the system that had been in place for 152 years.
So in terms of, to get quickly to the Green position, I'm sure that many people know this, but we certainly believe that this election should be the last first past the post election. And we're going to work towards that in the next Parliament. We propose to convene a citizens' assembly to do a proper and thorough consultation, and on the basis of that to decide which system of representation we should have to replace the first past the post system, and that will be in place by the next election cycle. I've been talking a lot today, I apologize. That's our position, but absolutely, this is again, fundamentally, it's a question of, for the next Parliament, who can you trust in order to implement the promises that they're making in this election? There were many people that loaned their votes to the Liberals in the previous election, and they feel robbed because they were promised proportional representation. They didn't vote for their first choice because they believed that the Liberals would institute it, and they didn't. And I said to Mr. Morneau in our last debate that they should have gone back and gotten a new mandate from the people if they had decided that they weren't going to keep a fundamental promise. And this applies in this election. Ask yourself, is it a promise just for the election? And is it a different story afterward?
So we're looking for number 15, 1-5. No 15? Number 49, 4-9. I feel like it's bingo. No, number 49. Number 56, 5-6. The timekeeper. Da, da, da. Now Leonard's on his own.
Okay, well, I don't have to go far, so I'll just ask this very quickly.
Just wait.
Okay. In Canada, in the Nova Scotia, there is a law in the books that offers the money, gives money for the scalp of a Mi'kmaq. And I would like to know who of you would take that off, because in our great state, in our country of Canada, we should have no law like that, and they refuse to take it off the books.
Yeah, I did not know that was on the books, and I have a feeling that there is no one on the panel that is going to want to keep that on the books. Just in general, what we still haven't done and what we need to do is a thorough review. And this applies to all fundamental rights. The approach we should always have is, and especially as a federal government, is what are Canadians' fundamental rights. And when we have articulated those and identified those, we should be the #1 champions. And this should not be a question of jurisdiction. This should not be a question of politics. These are basic rights, and our first job above all is to make sure that they're protected, and protected in the same way across the entire country.
For clarity, that's on the Nova Scotia books, is that what you're saying? Well, I'm unfamiliar with that. Obviously, it's reprehensible. I don't have any way of telling Nova Scotia what to do, but understanding that would mean that we should be advocating for its removal, and thank you for telling me.
I think you're about to see a rare consensus across the table, across political ideologies. I'll join with my colleagues in condemning that law that's on the books. It has no place in the 21st century, and it certainly doesn't align with Canadian values and our value system.
I would also like to condemn that law. I think that, this grows out of a history of settler colonialism in Canada and white supremacy, something that absolutely needs to be eradicated within the Canadian system. We need to, again, this speaks to the sort of partnership that I was talking about earlier between all peoples in Canada, and we need to ensure that democratic rights, equal rights exist within our country.
Thank you for the question. That's really upsetting. And I'd like to say that I'm surprised that there are laws like that still in Canada, but I'm not actually that surprised that there are laws like that still in Canada. And that is really representative of the fact that the system is really messed up. And that for far too long, we've had to deal with systemic racism and institutional racism. And even the Liberal government, even this past government, was found to have, by the National Human Rights Tribunal, to have discriminated against Indigenous children. There are ongoing battles of decolonization that we continuously need to do on the forward path towards justice. And the fact that nobody else has thought to remove that from Nova Scotia law over the course of the last that's messed up. And I don't care. I will stand up as a federal representative and fight back against that, even though I have no jurisdiction in Nova Scotia. That law is absurd and absolutely has no place in Canadian history, in any century whatsoever. Let's be clear about that as well, too. Not just in the 21st century, in any century, it's unacceptable.
Okay, number 10. Miguel.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Miguel Avila. I'm a Regent Park resident. My question is related to the community benefits agreement that we are going to ignore on Saturday when TCAC is going to consult residents of Regent Park for 4 hours. We're going to select a developer. And without their knowledge, we are not introducing the collective benefits agreement to be part of the new contract for phases 4 and 5. We want to secure good jobs. We want to know which of you candidates will support Regent Park.
Okay, so Miguel, I appreciate your question. Thank you. My only concern is it's not a federal question. But if the candidates are happy to address it, then I would be glad to have the candidates address it if you're comfortable doing so. Yep, yeah, sure. Would you like to? Are we this way now? Brian first.
I would rather, does the room want us to answer the question? I'm more than happy to answer anything the room wants. Yes, absolutely. So community benefit agreements are fantastic ways that we can integrate with communities. I worked supporting the workers at Casino Woodbine, and Casino Woodbine is actually seeing a huge expansion that's working directly with an underserved community in Rexdale to actually build and make sure that there are good transferable skills and training programs that are built into that community benefit agreement. So there's no reason to not advocate for these things, and I think the questions of jurisdiction are oftentimes a little nebulous. There's no reason why we can't have a position, and federal leaders can't have, and your federal representatives can't have positions on what's going on in the city. We still live in the city, and this is still really important for us. So I don't know the specifics about why there's no community benefits agreement in Regent Park, and I wish I did, and I will consult definitely with all of you to learn more about that. But I've seen this work in other communities, and I'm confident that it could work here too. And if there isn't one, there's no reason to not advocate for one. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Miguel. I appreciate the question. I also want to say that I would advocate for a community benefits agreement in this community. I think that ultimately, we can see it just outside. This community is facing gentrification as well as poverty, and it's a very, odd, disturbing mix of sort of development and non-development in this community. I think we need to uplift the people of Toronto Centre and of Regent Park specifically by implementing things like free job training, implementing things like having a democratic, open sort of forum for Regent Park people to voice their concerns, to voice what they need in their community, and to voice what they want the future of their community to be.
Thank you, Miguel. It's a great question. I do love local politics. As Jack Layton said, it's the politics of where you live. So we all share jurisdictional boundaries and arguments sometimes between the 3 levels of government, but at the end of the day, this is where we call home. And when we have problems, we want to have solutions to those problems. And so while I think it is a question better directed to your councillor for this area, Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam, and I think it's one that she should answer. I live in this riding, this ward, as it would happen to be the same boundaries, and I have the same question for her. I feel like our elected representatives at all levels in our neighborhood are focused on their own little pet projects more and more, and less about the issues that impact us in our daily lives at the grassroots level every day.
Well, thanks for the question. I actually do know something about this. It is by definition a municipal issue, but as your Member of Parliament, I've been trying to make sure that we advocate on behalf of what I think is a sensible approach to the redevelopment of Regent Park. So the city's currently going through a review of the developers, and I've been an active advocate going to Mayor Tory to advocate for an approach that's going to enable the residents to feel confident they'll continue to have strong representation as the Daniels Corp has been broadly successful in helping to make sure that development's gone well. So I'm going to continue to advocate in your behalf in that regard. I think while it's not my jurisdiction, it's not the jurisdiction of the federal government, I do see it as my responsibility to try and represent people in this area and do it in a way that ensures you have a place to live that you feel you can call home.
So thank you very much for the question, Miguel. And this again, I think this summarizes the fundamental mismatch between the Liberals and the Conservatives in terms of this riding and its future. In my opinion, there is no such thing as a municipal issue. There are just issues that affect the community. That's all there is. There is one citizen. There's not one citizen for different levels. There's just one citizen, and every single level of government needs to be actively involved, particularly in a riding like Toronto Centre with so many serious ongoing needs and concerns in order to make sure that the community gets the very best of everything that they can. I've asked around the community for who was the best MP. You know, I've asked community groups, community organizations in different visits, and they actually said it was Bill Graham, who was a Liberal member of Parliament. And the reason they said that he was because he was always looking for the tools that the federal government had at their disposal in order to make a difference in the community. He was here all the time, he was at meetings, he was advocating, and he didn't let federal jurisdiction stand in his way. And so that's the kind of member of parliament that I want to be for this community. That's what this community needs, an activist member of parliament who is not going to take no for an answer and who is going to deploy every tool at their disposal to make sure that this community has what it needs. And in terms of an update for Bill, there was a consultation project. Daniels Corp has been, oh sorry, my time's up. There has been an important update. Check the Toronto Star today. The community is not being consulted.
Yeah.
So I've used all my golden tickets, and it's over to Selwyn.
Number 99. Who has 99? Number 55. 55. Okay, 606. I'm going to blame the police officer for it. Myself and the officer was debating whether it was 606 or 909. Who has number 55? Yes, no, that's fine. We're calling all three numbers so we know where the people are. Who has number 13? 13. No one has number 13? Okay, we'll call it another number. So number 606 first. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Hi there. I wasn't here for the full meeting, so I couldn't ask other people a question, but I'm going to ask you directly. I understand you lived in the Regent Park with the limited house space, and housing supposed to be doing something about it, even though they know about it, right? So I feel like they're not doing their job. So what would you do?
It wasn't Regent Park, but it was housing similar to that. It was the Weston Road area. And I know the difference that it makes in terms of every single day of your life. Where do I study at night when I was a student? You know, who's going to bed first? Because the lights are on, because there's 4 of you in the room. These are things that if you haven't lived through them, it's very hard to explain. In terms of what can be done, there's no question that there is a crisis of affordable housing in Toronto Centre. Toronto Centre is, if it's not in the top 10, it's definitely in the top 15 most expensive ridings in the entire, and most unaffordable ridings in the entire country in terms of affordable housing. So it's a crisis, and the crisis has gotten worse each and every year since the election, since the previous election. Sorry, I can't see sorry. And so what we need is a national housing strategy that specifically for this community makes sure that there is a massive investment in affordable rental housing that revitalizes our co-op housing system, this is really the birthplace almost of co-op housing, and that reprioritizes rental housing. This is an area where 70% of the residents live in rental housing, but we have government strategies that are only focused on people who live in houses that they buy.
Well, when we came into office back in 2015, there was no national housing strategy. The Conservatives had been there for 10 years and they had not thought it was important to have a national housing strategy. We immediately put in place a strategy. It's a $55 billion strategy. I know that it's important to actually have an impact here in Toronto Centre, so I've been very focused on that. There have been 260,000 units built across the country over the course of the last few years. 4,200 of them have been here in Toronto Centre. There's more to do. So of the $55 billion strategy, we've so far gotten through about 15 billion of it, which means there's still 40 billion to come. So I agree with Annemie. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Okay. And I also agree with her that we need more rental spaces. We put in place a rental construction financing, which is allowing developers to actually get financing for building rental units. That's intended to build about 42,000 units across the country. So this is a tough problem. It's a really important problem in Toronto Centre in particular, and we're going to stay on it. I mean, we need to continue to see those sort of advantages come through. I think Regent Park is a particularly good example where we've had success, but there's certainly more to be done.
Time.
This city in our riding is growing, that's clear. And development and growth is a good thing. I mean, more and more people are choosing to make our community their home. And they're doing that because it's a great place to live. I mean, that much is obvious. Our neighborhoods are vibrant and thriving, but there isn't anywhere for anyone to live. From affordable housing to being able to save for a down payment on a condo, or if you're in Bill's neighborhood, maybe a detached home. We want to change that. I think the mortgage stress test on home ownership is ridiculous. Nobody can meet that demand. So we want to rework the mortgage stress test. And we want to actually start building on the commitments that were made in the Liberal government's infrastructure plan, which is why Andrew Scheer and a Conservative government will commit to funding every single commitment made for infrastructure by the Liberal government that they have failed to deliver on over the last 4 years.
Thousands and thousands more units of affordable social housing. Now, I personally know quite a few people who live in Toronto Centre, but one person that comes to mind is my friend Reese, who on one side of his room, what he pays hundreds and hundreds of dollars for, is a curtain, that's his wall, and on the other side is a balcony out into the street. So this is just not right, and this is one of the good units for housing. I've talked to so many people while I'm out canvassing who say they're on horrible wait lists. They can't afford to live where they are. They've been waiting, 12 years to live in a tiny, tiny unit, and it's just not right. So the Communist Party of Canada commits to building affordable housing and to making sure that this is social housing that is available to everyone and that is available to you no matter how much you make, but ultimately we want you to be making a livable wage.
Thank you for the question. I know when it comes to housing, it's very deeply personal. Our home is very important to us, and it's very important to being able to rest, to be able to cook, to be able to share with family. And when that situation is very precarious, it's hard for everybody. So I acknowledge that that's very challenging, and it's challenging for so many of us that are here in Toronto Centre. But let's be clear, it's an issue right across the country, and it's an issue primarily because we're focused on building one thing: condominiums and homes for personal home ownership. We're not talking about the fact that 71% of the people who live in Toronto Centre are renters. 71% of what's going up around here, how many towers up here around us are rentals? I live at Yonge and College, and we're surrounded by condominiums. And it makes me really worried to think about the kind of Toronto Centre that we're building. We're talking about queer seniors who have to leave because they can't afford to stay downtown anymore. We're talking about 35-year-old, 40-year-old people who live with roommates to be able to afford to stay in the communities that they love and that they're connected to. So we're talking about building 500,000 new units of affordable housing, and that means co-ops, it means purpose-built rentals, it means below-market rent units, it means alternative models like co-housing. There's a lot of work that can be done, and we have to make sure that we're doing it.
Thank you.
Hi, I would just like to say thank you, Brian. You knocked on my door at the co-op.
So I know that you're a huge supporter of cooperative housing. And to the Green Party candidate for bringing that up, first and foremost, thank you. My question was also about affordable housing. And Mr. Monroe, I'm really happy to hear that 40 billion of that 50 that is in the National Housing Strategy has not yet been spent, because the federal government needs to get back into the housing game. You need to be the leaders for things like cooperative housing that create communities and affordability for people. And at that, I'm going to pass my questions to somebody else, because you've addressed affordable housing tonight. But
time. So just before we go on to answer that question, if I can just remind camera that I think that this end of the room was supposed to be the no film zone. Is that correct?
We weren't filming. We didn't have that camera on.
Okay. Just so we know.
Number 20. Who has number 20?
Okay, here I come.
Hi, do you mind if I hold it? Oh, you got it. Hi, Lindsay, 6 years resident St. Jamestown, 6 years here in Regent Park. I'd like to ask everybody specifically, like quite specifically, what you will do, if anything at all, about the gun problem, if and when you get to Ottawa.
Oh. Sure. Thank you for the question. I come from our community, right? I know the fears that many of us have, and many people are afraid to go out at night times and feel unsafe in their own homes and feel kind of under attack. But there isn't one solution to what we need to do in order to fight our communities. But what I can commit to you is that I will bring the stakeholders together. I will make sure the agencies are in play. I will make sure that people are consulted, that communities are consulted, and I won't be an absentee representative. It means coming to the table every single time, especially when it's most difficult, and especially when our community is in crisis and is dealing with the shocks of losing loved ones from those communities due to violence of any kind. But let's also be clear that we're also seeing a rise in other types of violence as well too. Anti-gay violence, homophobic violence, misogynistic violence, anti-Islamophobic violence. There are so many types of virulent racist action happening, and we have to make sure there's a strategy for that, and the NDP is committed to a national anti-hate strategy.
Thank you for your question. The Communist Party of Canada commits to banning handguns in Canada, totally, completely. So our office is actually located on the Danforth, so the attack on the Danforth was really shocking to us as we were just a block away. We are in no position as Canadians to, be in a position where we need handguns to defend ourselves on some large scale. Like, this is just not realistic. So we propose that we ban all handguns, and further, banning hate groups as the criminal groups that they are. Banning hate groups, banning homophobia, banning racism, banning Islamophobia, banning anti-Semitism. This will all be criminalized so you can sleep safer at night.
There's no mistake that there's a very serious gun problem in our city, and specifically in Toronto Centre. I live at Church and Dundas. It's a stone throw or bullet shot away from Yonge and Dundas Square. I hear the sirens. I'm sure you do too. They keep us all up at night. When you watch the news in the morning, the newsreel highlights is scene after scene after scene of flashing lights and victims fallen in this city to out-of-control gun crime. The Liberals have had 4 years to fix this problem, let's be clear. They want to ban firearms outright. This policy fails to address the true problem: criminals who use guns to commit violence. A ban on the legal ownership of firearms for people who essentially already face a ban does nothing to prevent criminals from using firearms when they commit crimes. The real problems can be addressed in a two-pronged approach. We have to stop people from feeling like joining a gang is their only option in this city. And secondly, we have to stop the flow of firearms into this country from where they're actually coming from. They're not coming from legal gun owners, they're coming across the border. We have to be talking about securing our border, investing in our border protection, and in ensuring that the people who choose to use a firearm in the commission of a crime are... Sorry. Thank you.
I really hope to be your representative in the next Parliament. I would be desperately worried if Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives get in for many reasons, but one of them is on guns. We've taken Stephen Harper's approach, which he made it easier for people to get guns, and we've tightened those laws. We know there's more that we need to do. We put restrictions on getting guns across the border. We invested significantly RCMP and Canada Border Security so we could reduce guns flowing into the country. We've tried to work with groups to ensure that youth have more options in what they can actually do. And what we're committing in this campaign is that we're going to ban assault weapons, AR-15s. Hard to believe they're still legal, but we're going to ban them. And we're going to give municipalities across the country the ability to ban handguns. And we're going to stay on top of this.
So again, an excellent example of why I think there's a mismatch between this community and the Liberals and the Conservatives. For those of us who have experienced violence firsthand, I mean, first of all, I'm offended by Ryan's comments, labeling every person who's ever been involved in a criminal offense with a gun as a criminal and saying that they're the real problem is very convenient, but it doesn't deal with the root causes of crime, which usually have to do with poverty, which is one of the main indicators in terms of violent outcomes. We call for a ban on handguns and a ban on automatic rifles to stop the flow of them, and also a confidential buyback program for guns. But at the end of the day, this problem is not going to be solved until we deal with the root causes. And this is where, again, we get back to the just society and the compassionate social safety net that should make sure that we all live dignified lives and that we don't ever have to turn to, or our loved ones ever have to turn to violence or the streets in order to find meaning in their lives or to provide for their families.
Number 23, 2-3. And number 33, 3-3. Where's number 33? Okay.
Yeah, my name is Michael. I'm First Nations. I have a question for all the candidates. Would your party support motions denouncing the doctrines of discovery and terra nullius?
Terra nullius. Could we give perhaps a second just to have an explanation of what that is so that the... I think he'd like to just explain. Yeah. Would you like to explain?
Yeah, the doctrines of discovery is a colonial proclamation that was signed by I think it was signed by the Pope Pius, and it said that anybody who is not a Christian and resides in North America should be killed, and so that was part of the claiming of stolen lands in North America. One of the laws.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, is me first?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will just read, I really can't say this better myself, and I tried to read the words from our platform in certain instances, particularly because the language that was developed around our platform and policies with respect to First Nations and Indigenous peoples were developed by Indigenous peoples themselves and First Nations themselves who are part of the Green Party, and many of whom are running for the Green Party in the federal election. So in one of the largest sections of our platform, which is on our relationship with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous sovereignty, we say that we formally repudiate the doctrine of terra nullius, the doctrine of discovery, and other doctrines of superiority. And again, these for us, it is just simply not words. In my case, I come also from a culture that and a background where we were just ripped away from our homelands, where we have very little sense of our own personal identity and our history. And so these words have real meaning for me. If you look at the Green Platform, you will see that all throughout it, whether you're talking about healthcare or water or the climate or whatever, we place the needs and our determination for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples at the heart of it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think, sir, as you probably know, working to improve the outcomes for Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit has been one of the key goals of our government. Reconciling with the challenges in the past has been an important part of that. We've made significant progress. I've been responsible, obviously, for developing agreements so that First Nations can actually be self-governing nations. We've made significant progress. We've made good progress on our efforts to come through on important projects like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's File. There is much more to do. We've significantly increased our funding over the course of the last 4 years by more than 50% on Indigenous peoples, but there is more to do, and I'm looking forward, hopefully, to having the opportunity to continue our work. It is a long-term project where we need to make sure that we have equality of opportunity and appropriate situation for people across the country, including Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit.
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. I've spent a good chunk of my career working with an organization known as Egal Canada Human Rights Trust, where we were deeply involved in developing approaches and strategies for decolonization and reconciliation with LGBTQ2 Canadians across this country. It's an issue that really gets me personally. I think that it's one that we can all identify with. It's one that we all agree is long overdue for a solution. And I'll agree with my colleague from the Green Party that words do matter. As your candidate, it's my job to listen to the opinions that you have and bring them back to the party and represent your voice in Ottawa. And that's my commitment to you. I hear what you are saying tonight. I commit to bringing it back to the party, and I commit to bringing it forward as your voice in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think over the past few years, we've seen a lot of theatrics, we've seen a lot of crocodile tears, and we've seen a lot of broken promises from our current ruling governments in terms of, the rights of Indigenous people. I think there's a lot of talk of, white supremacy not being a Canadian value. Unfortunately, as we can see over the past few weeks, it still is. And we need to change that. We need, as an immediate demand, not a goal, not a long-term vision, as an immediate demand, we need a voluntary partnership between the people who are currently the ruling class of Canada and people who have been pushed aside and neglected since the beginning of the country's foundation. Now, what this means is that people like Indigenous communities, people from Quebec, people from other communities who are maybe immigrants or refugees, all working together to create this new partnership that doesn't just value white, English-speaking Canadians, but actually values the promises made to Indigenous communities and other communities in Canada.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the question. And I definitely reject that. That principle, that international principle is used. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, I do want to challenge you to actually go out there and learn about what terra nullius is. And it was very much used the way that the colonizers from Europe came into this country, many other countries around the world, and completely decimated Indigenous populations by not respecting that they had traditional title to that land. What I will say is that the Supreme Court is a colonial structure. I absolutely recognize that, but there are two cases in particular that give Aboriginal and Indigenous people the right to the land, to hunt on that land, and that's RV Sparrow and RV Delgumukwa. And those two, I think, are absolutely core to the work that we're going to do if we want to continue to work towards Indigenous solidarity and truth and reconciliation by recognizing that Indigenous communities have not ceded land. We are settlers on that land, and we do not have the entitlement to tell them what to do with that land and how they can do it with that land. And we cannot go on that land and do what we want with that land without consulting first with those First Nations. So thank you very much for the question, and I promise to work with Indigenous communities.
We're going to do number 70, which is the final question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mary. My comments are primarily directed to Mr. Morneau. However, I do invite other candidates to express an opinion on my question. Some of you may not be familiar with what the topic I'm about to discuss, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. In September 2018, the Senate of Canada adopted the Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs report. The title of the report was "The Shame is Ours: Forced Adoptions of the Babies of Unmarried Mothers in Post-War Canada." The report addressed the 300,000. Okay. The number one recommendation of this report was that the Liberal government apologize. Okay. The report recommended chance to finish my question.
Yes, you can't have a broad. You cannot have a broad preamble. You've referred to the report. Please direct your question.
Mr. Morneau, would you care to explain why the Trudeau government has failed to issue an apology to the 300,000 Canadian women whose babies were illegally stolen from them and put up for adoption? The number one recommendation of the Senate report was that the federal government issue an apology within 1 year, and the fake feminists, your colleagues who are fake feminists.
You've asked your question, which is why hasn't the federal government issued an apology? Mr. Morneau will answer your question.
I'd be happy to answer your question. I just have to tell you, ma'am, that I'm unfamiliar with that Senate report. As you can imagine, there's many things that come before government. Certainly, we've tried our best to deal with past wrongs. It sounds like this is a past wrong that a previous government is responsible for, and I would be happy to understand more about it after this session, if you want to tell me about that report, and take it up.
Yes, who has number 2? Number 2? Number 57.
Okay, so closing time in 2 minutes. We're going to, sorry. Closing statements, 2 minutes. My apologies. So now I've lost track, but I think we are starting at this end, if we could, with the Green Party candidate, Annemie Paul. Closing statement, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. There's a fly flying around if you see me doing this, that's why. I wanted to thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. I really enjoy the opportunity to answer direct questions from the community. And as I said at the beginning, this election is particularly important. There is a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake for our country because of the climate emergency. There is a lot at stake for this community as well. The question that you need to ask yourself is, who will you have confidence in, and who do you have confidence in to be a champion on behalf of this community? What this community needs and what it has been lacking for the last 4 years is an involved advocate that is going to move the dial forward on the issues that are still outstanding. Our crime rates have gone up every single year in this community since the last election. Our affordability has become worse every single year since the last election, okay? Life is more of a challenge than it was 4 years ago. And while I respect that not everything can be done in 4 years, more should have been done and more could be done. So in terms of me as a representative for your community and the communities that are here and for Toronto Centre, I am, in terms of credentials, I am a lawyer. I have a master's degree in public affairs. I have worked internationally. I have set up social enterprises. I'm telling you all of this so you know that I am ready, I am prepared, and I'm laser focused on being your advocate and your champion in Ottawa to make sure that this community gets the services, the support that it deserves in order that every member of our community can live in dignity and that they can have hope for themselves and their future. A safe, affordable green city is possible, and I hope you'll join me.
Next, closing statements from Bill Morneau from the Liberal Party of Canada.
Thank you, and thank you all of you for being here tonight. It's, as I mentioned at the outset, been an honor to be your member of Parliament for the Liberal government for the last 4 years. I think Annemie is right in the sense that there is more that we need to do in Toronto Centre. We have made progress on issues that are really important here. We've made progress on poverty rates. We've made progress on housing. We've made progress on issues that I know are critically important for people here. I know that we need to continue with our housing plan. We need to ensure that the comments from the woman who's left the room are followed through on. We need more housing units here. Our plan is to continue to make investments that will make a difference. We need to continue to focus on safety for people in Toronto Centre. So our approach to banning weapons that can be dangerous is critically important. I want you to know that we're also going to focus on affordability for people here. By lowering taxes, yes. By increasing student grants, by improving the amount of money that old age security gives to seniors. These are initiatives that will make a big and important difference for people that are struggling day to day to get by. So I'm looking forward, hopefully, to your vote. I'm looking forward, hopefully, to being part of a new government that will allow us to continue to work on your behalf. And from my perspective, being your advocate is an important part of my role, and I'd like to be able to continue to do that in a way that will be effective in making change that's important.
Thank you. 2 minutes for Ryan Lester from the Conservative Party of Canada.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight. I'd like to take a little bit of my closing remarks to address the last question that was posed just to the Minister of Finance himself about requesting an apology. This is indeed something that we see a lot of for this government, and we see this government very quick to issue one when it serves their best interests. What we haven't seen is an apology on the issue raised here tonight, and we haven't seen an apology to Jody Wilson-Raybould or to Jane Philpott either. So there are outstanding apologies indeed from the Prime Minister, who is one of the sorriest Prime Ministers we've ever had. After 26 years of Liberals in Toronto Centre, I think they're taking your support for granted. I should know I voted for Mr. Morneau and the Prime Minister in the last election. I believed the promises that were made to us. I thought that we were going to have a fiscally responsible government that was going to prioritize social progress. And that's what people tell me every day. That's what they're looking for. They want a government that lives within their means and takes care of social issues. They want to believe, they want to get behind a party that is going to focus on the real issues of people's daily lives. I'm excited to be bringing together everyone who believes in fiscal responsibility and in social progress. I believe you deserve a federal government that is responsible with your money, that protects our environment, that makes real progress on community safety, and that involves ending automatic bail for people who use a gun in the commission of a crime. I also believe that you deserve a federal government that will work to reduce barriers faced by everyone in the community so that you don't only barely get by, you actually get ahead. So the question is clear. Who do you trust to deliver on the promises made tonight?
Thank you. So next, please, we'll hear from Bronwyn Craig from the Communist Party of Canada. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for inviting me out here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about our platform. Now, the reason why I am campaigning in Toronto Centre is, I experience a lot of the struggles that people experience in this riding as a student, as a young person, as someone who faces healthcare challenges, as someone who is LGBT. And I really think that Toronto Centre deserves a candidate who actually knows what they're talking about and knows the struggles of the people in Toronto Centre. The Communist Party of Canada has, in my opinion, the most progressive platform on climate change, on taxing, on things like immigration and refugee status, and many, many other issues that concern us both locally and both nationally. Now, I really, really hope that you consider voting for the Communist Party of Canada. The Liberal Party has not done anything for Toronto Centre in a quarter of a century, which is longer than I've been alive. And I really think that this is a crucial election where you can choose who you want to vote for and not vote strategically. This is a riding that really needs change, really needs someone who is in a position where they know what the struggles are of people and is in a position to implement not just candidacy change, but real, actual system change and upheaval. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Brian Chang from the New Democratic Party. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. It is so exciting to see faces in the room, and so many that I have met and so many that I have yet to meet, because we have so much work to do as a community. And I come from this community. I used to work at the Center for Social Innovation when it first opened in 2013. Fantastic. And I live at Yonge and College with my partner, Jeff. And it's really important that we start to take action on the things that are important to everyday Canadians. And the environment is the #1 issue that's coming up at the doors. And I've waited my entire life for this to be the #1 issue that's coming up at the doors, because the climate emergency is real. And I have a 2-year-old niece who lives in Surrey, BC. And she has to deal with forest fires, and the air quality gets so bad that she's not allowed to go outside and play. She's 2 years old, and the reality of summers for her means forest fires, where it's unsafe for her to go outside. That can't be the norm for everyday people. That can't be the norm for First Nations communities up north. It can't be the norm for communities in Bangladesh. It can't be the norm that the Toronto Islands are flooded and that we can't watch fireworks on Ashridge's Bay. We need to take serious action on this now, and we need to make sure that we're electing representatives who show up, who we see in our communities, who come from our communities and are willing to fight for them. Whether they're LGBTQ2S+, whether they're Indigenous, whether they're low income, whether they're racialized, whether they are workers, whether they are not workers, whether they are seniors. We have to make sure we're implementing the policy so that nobody gets left behind, and we are in it for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody being here. Thank you for you 5 and your words and your answers to the questions. And also for being on time. We were supposed to only ask 5 or 6 questions tonight, and we got through 9 questions. So thank you so much for everybody for participating. I'd also like to thank our moderators, Selwyn and Megan. If we could give them a round of applause. It's hard to work a room this size, and thanks to our timekeepers, Ina and Leonard as well. I just wanted to thank the people who have made this possible again, the members of the Community Civic Engagement Collaborative. We are open to having people join us. So if you're interested in putting on these kinds of events and to inspiring people to use their voice here in this community, please join us. You can find one of us here tonight, and we would be more than happy to have you on the collaborative to bring more events to the community. And I would also like to thank, as I said in the beginning, the support of the Canadian Muslim Vote, who sponsored our translation and also our food. They have a table out in the front hall with lots of swag, so if you want to pick up some stuff from them, they would be happy to talk to you. And also the support of Eat, Think, Vote, and our partners, the Food Secure Canada and also Community Food Centres of Canada. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for you five for your words and your answers and all of the things. And thanks for the community for coming out and supporting this kind of thing. Enjoy your evening.
If I could just have one reminder to everyone, don't forget to vote. Do not forget to vote. You can vote at your elections office now. You can vote in the advance polls on Thanksgiving weekend, and you can vote on October 21st.